So now when we have spoken about the major essentials of a valid contract, let us first know there are few sections in Indian Contract Act which define the void agreements. Section 25 defines an agreement which is without consideration, as we have already discussed before. Now, with moving on, we can also discuss Section 26 of Indian Contract Act, which says an agreement is void if it is restraining marriage. So if one person can restrain you to marry another person, then it's a void agreement. Third, we can discuss is restraining your legal proceeding, and an agreement which restrains you from moving ahead or going against or moving on to a dispute to a matter is obviously a void agreement. Further, Section 27 also says restraining trade. So, for example, if we talk about restraining trade, there have been multiple cases in our case laws history wherein people have agreed that they should not trade further. There have been employers who have filed matters stating that my previous employee or my current employee has moved on to another organization wherein he has given or disclosed some important information, and he should be restrained from moving to another competitive company or a competitive organization. In such cases, court usually holds an opinion that there has to be mentioned a reasonable or a knowledgeable restriction, that why are you having a threat of not of your employee not going to a competitive company. For example, if I hire an employee today and I share some confidential information of my organization, of course I will be in a threat that this information can be disclosed to the new organization he joins, and that threat has to be proved in the court. There has to be a reasonable belief of me stating the fact that there is a threat and the information can be disclosed by my previous or my current employee who is now moving to another organization. This is covered under Section 27 of Indian Contract Act, which says restraining trade or profession. Further, there's also a wagering contract that we just discussed. Wagering contracts, as we have already mentioned, are the contracts which have betting or any condition which is uncertain, is not futuristic, or is may or may not happen. Those are wagering contracts. Moving on, when we have discussed valid contracts, voidable contracts, and void contracts, we should also know what are the standard boiler clauses of an agreement or a contract when we decide to draft an agreement. Now, first of all, we should know what are standard boiler or a boilerplate clause. Boilerplate clause are the clauses which are supposed to be an agreement when you draft one. Let's say A and B, or maybe you and me, have an agreement today. It's a two-party agreement, right? There is A and B, or you and me. In such cases, we are supposed to have some important clauses which defines our agreement or our liabilities to each other. These are called terms of an agreement. First of all, of course, there will be the mentioning of both the parties. I will give my details, which will include my company name, my authorized signatory, my registered office address, and that's it. That will be considered as, let's say, first party. And the party which is going to be I am having an agreement with is the second party. Similarly, there will be details of the second party as well. The company's name, the authorized signatory, could be a director, partner, shareholder, or anybody from the company. Their registered office address, again, the second party. Thereafter, you mention the recitals of the company. Now, recital is a very, very important part of an agreement. Recital decides what an agreement will be about. For example, let's say you and me have a service agreement today. This service agreement recital should contain that party A and party B, or first party and second party, are now entering into an agreement for the services of hospitality. For example, I intend to take some hospitality services from you. You are a party which has a lot of manpower, and you can supply that manpower to my organization for hospitality services. Could be like providing me tea, coffee, snacks, anything, whatever hospitality services I need in my organization for probably my guests or my employees, or for my own self or my partners or shareholders or directors. So recital is basically a very small little paragraph wherein you decide that what kind of services there will be, a brief of services. Thereafter, what do you think of? Of course, there has to be a term of agreement. An agreement usually is not made in perpetuity, which is a term which is in indefinite period. Most of the times when we have an agreement is for a year, but otherwise it is obviously decided by both the parties that for how long would you want an agreement. Usually the term of the agreement is 1 year. uh, and how do you write it? You write it like the effective period of this agreement is from, let's say, 1st June 2022 till 30th May 2023, for a period of 1 year. That's a term of the agreement. Moving on to any other clause that we need to mention is liability. Now, liability is a very, very important clause because there has to be a defined liability in case any damage occurs. Who is liable to what? You are liable. Let's say if I was taking some hospitality services from you, you are liable to pay me some services, those hospitality services. Your manpower should come in time, your manpower should wear a uniform, your manpower should not create a chaos in my organization, should not be abusive, should not be basically demeaning my company, anything. So your liability is to provide me the correct amount of services, and I am liable to pay you your fees, which is decided, which is another clause now. Talking about fees, remuneration / consideration. Now, the third point that we discuss about is a consideration. Consideration is, if I am taking services from you, of course, I have made an offer, or you have made an offer to me that I, ABC Private Limited, provide some hospitality services. In return of the same, I would request you to pay me, let's say, 3 lakh rupees a year. So now the consideration amount between the parties is decided, and you mentioned that for the said services or for said hospitality services, the consideration between the parties has been fixed to this amount on monthly basis or yearly basis, however the mutual consent comes out to be. Now, the fourth important clause that we are going to talk about is confidentiality. In a lot of organizations that we have seen, before an agreement, before a formal agreement entered between the parties, you already have a NDA between the parties. Now, why am I talking about NDA and confidentiality, and why did I pick up NDA here? Has a logic behind. So NDA and confidentiality are basically the same thing, but NDA, as we say, non-disclosure agreement. For example, there were 10 people who came to me with a proposal of giving me hospitality services like ABC Private Limited. There was XYZ, there was MNC, there was WQY, could be any amount. There could be like sole proprietorship, company, LLP, partnership, whatever. That does not matter. So all of them came to my organization. I shared some details about my organization with them. And now I have to just select one organization or one company who's going to serve me the hospitality services. But my confidential information could have gone to other 9 people as well. And now this confidential information can be misused or cannot be misused, but I cannot take a risk of it. So a non-disclosure agreement basically says that whatever information you and me share shall remain confidential. We enter into a non-disclosure agreement before entering into a formal agreement just to keep ourselves safe. Further, coming back to the clause of confidentiality, similarly, when we enter into an agreement, we have a clause of confidentiality which says whatever information is being shared by the parties herein shall remain confidential. And now this period of confidentiality can be fixed or can be in perpetuity on the basis that this has been consented by both the parties. We see usually that the information which is being kept confidential between the parties have a tenure. Could be 3 years, 5 years, 10 years, 15, 20, or could be in perpetuity because the company does not want to take a risk and would want to save the information which is being shared. For example, now keeping it at risk, let's say I hire an employee or I hire a manpower at my organization, and that manpower works at a premium desk of IT department for good 5 years and 6 years. Now, this personnel who worked in the IT department for my organization has a lot of information about my organization. Could be through my online data transfer, could be through writings, could be, let's say he was in the IT department, he may know a lot of loopholes of my organization, may know a lot of advantages, could know a lot of big people, now can also go ahead and share my information. So keeping myself safe, I make sure that there is a clause of confidentiality in the agreement, and it is a very, very important clause. Now, when we have discussed recitals, we have discussed what? We have discussed term, we have discussed consideration, we have discussed liability. One important clause is now again IPR. IPR is intellectual property rights. Intellectual property rights, of course, deals with the logo, the trademark, or any signs, symbols which are associated with the organization and should not be misused. How can an employee misuse my logo or my trademark or my image, or can tarnish my logo? Example. Now, my company's logo can be misused by an employee on a letterhead or copying it on a document and now forging the signatures and saying that, this company has given me this letter of appreciation, but it's actually not true. So you're not supposed to use any products or any logos or any patent rights which have been given exclusively to that organization. And that is why you have a clause of IPR, intellectual property rights. For example, as we were taking about this hospitality manpower, hospitality manpower concerned person who is hired by this organization, which was my organization, cannot go and use my logo, or cannot go and use my letterhead, or cannot go and use my envelopes for any other purpose. Similarly, my files or my documents cannot be going outside the organization. So we've discussed 5 boilerplate clauses. Moving on, we can also talk about force majeure. Force majeure is, of course, in a layman's language, everyone knows, is an act of God, an unprecedented event or an incident which can happen and you do not expect. For most of us to understand it better, we can explain it as a COVID-19 situation, wherein we did not expect that employees would be working from home 24 hours. Maybe like throughout the week, they're working 24 hours, they're working throughout the week, and they're working from home, and now the staff is not there. So in such a situation, how can there be an issue? Okay, moving on to the same example that we were taking, a hospitality service manpower. Now, this manpower wants to take his salary, and the salary can only be generated by a finance employee. And a finance employee can only work from office because there is a system which has been kept at office to generate his invoices, to meet people and get it signed. And it cannot happen on e-departments or online methods, because now COVID-19 was such a new situation for everybody that we were not prepared. In such a case, we can say that this was a very unprecedented situation. How do we save ourselves as a company in this matter? Question very oftenly arises that whether force majeure clause shall be applicable or not in such a situation. So most of the companies that we see is force majeure will be applicable. Now, force majeure situation usually which are applicable are strikes, lockdowns, government hartals, anything like that, which is done by government authorities. But in a situation like force majeure, also, usually the person who is giving you services keeps a force majeure with an exception saying, even in the case of force majeure, the payment shall be made in time. Now, it is your responsibility if you want to really guard your organization or a company, stating that we will not be able to pay until this period ends, or until this act of God or this unprecedented situation, which is like COVID-19, ends. And once it ends, or it comes to an end, or it absolutely gets away from, from it being in occurrence, then we can definitely release your payment. So everything in agreement, when you are entering into an agreement, there is a requirement of a negotiation, there is a requirement of discussion. That is why at long stretches, the parties, especially the legal counsels of organizations, the companies that we enter in agreement with, they have long discussions so that they can come to a conclusion and then enter all of it in an agreement. So a clause like force majeure, whether the payment shall be made right at the moment on the 30th of the month or shall be made after the situation is released, shall be discussed and then further made. Moving on, what other clauses we should see? Anti-bribery is one of the clauses nowadays that it has been seen. Anti-bribery is a clause that the employee that I hire from you, or the services that I hire from you, or a connection that I made from any of the employees of your organization. Let's say I was this person who was seeking services, hospitality services from a company. So that company, I approve that company to give me services. I should not be involving myself in corruption, and the other party who's trying to give me services should also not offer me any bribe. So anti-corruption clause is also being seen in the agreements these days. Apart from that, I think these are like standard boiler clauses that you see. Scope of services. Okay, we did not discuss this. Right after recitals, which was the first statement that we discussed, scope of services comes first. Scope of services is again, what are the services that you're seeking from the other party? Hospitality services, as we discussed, could be the person shall come in time and the person shall provide me coffee whenever, wherever required, in the meeting rooms, at the desk, in the canteen area. So the services can be well defined. Also, the services are given sometimes as a part of annexure. So why do we keep, there has been a discussion about why do we specifically mention these services being given by the other party or you as a part of annexure? Because usually services can be amended. Something that can be amended or is open to change or modification is kept in an annexure. Okay. Let's say, for example, I hire a manpower from a security company, a security services company, and I ask them that I need 5 manpower for my organization, and now this 5 manpower will be standing at gate number 5 today. Tomorrow I decide that this party will not be standing at gate number 5. Probably 3 of the security guards will stand at gate number 5. 2 of them will stand at gate number 3 of my organization. In such a case, do I have to amend my entire agreement? No. That becomes taxing. That becomes very difficult for me to enter into an agreement, because I may have to again put a stamp duty to the agreement. It'll be a longer process. There'll be a lot of discussion, then negotiation will end up, okay, we can change this clause, we can change that clause. So just to get away from that hassle, we usually keep the services which are being taken in a form of an annexure. Annexure is an extra document that you attach with your agreement. So agreement is usually made one time and it keeps renewing via a renewal letter. If there are some minute changes which are done during the agreement period or when it is renewed next year, so there is an amendment letter. We can discuss amendment letter and renewal letter also once we are done with boilerplate clauses. And annexure is, of course, an extra document wherein we define the services that we take. Today, I decide that I want my security guards on gate number 5. Tomorrow, I decide I want my security guards on gate number 5 and gate number 2. So I cannot get into a hassle of drawing the entire agreement again and again. So what do? I just replace the annexure with a letter of amendment that now the agreement is hereby amended in a form wherein the other earlier we had security guards deployed at gate number 5. Total number of security guards were 5. Now are substituted with the security guards being deployed at gate number 5 and gate number 2 respectively, having 3 and 2 security guards at the gates as mentioned. Similarly, you amend your agreement whenever there is a requirement. Now, when we have discussed the standard boiler clauses, which are the required clauses of every agreement, most of the times that you see an agreement, let's now first discuss a renewal agreement. Like, let's say, how do you renew your agreement, or how do you amend your agreement? So there is a letter of amendment, and there is a letter of renewal that you have in an agreement, with an agreement to support your agreement. If you want to renew your agreement next year, or you want to amend your agreement during your agreement is valid, which, as we discussed, was, for example, a period of 1 year, 1st June to 30th May. Ishan, we are doing okay?